Hi everyone, and welcome to the Microsoft Product Licensing Terms update from the version 1 software asset management team for June 2025. Hey Neve, hey William, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Good,
Yeah.
thanks, Greg.
Right. So Microsoft's financial year end is June, and as you can guess, the number of updates this month is relatively light. So I'll kick things off. I had a look at the universal terms and also some glossary updates. So within the universal license terms, what's changed for 2025? This is an interesting one. So in the product terms, it says it's changed, but actually when you get into the weeds of the universal license terms themselves, it looks like this change hasn't been reflected yet. So it's either buried somewhere else in the documentation, or it just hasn't trickled through into the actual wording as of yet. So what has changed, what Microsoft are saying has changed, is that they've clarified who needs to buy an add-on license under the same licensing agreement as their base license. So before it sounded like any add-on, i.e. any license with a prerequisite, had to be bought under the same agreement as the base license. Now Microsoft are clarifying that only cloud add-ons to software assurance or SA need to be brought under the same agreement as their qualifying license. So what does this mean? It means that not every license with a prerequisite has the same agreement requirement. Only specific cloud add-ons linked to SA do. So that's probably an interesting one for customers who are potentially purchasing certain licenses through CSP, as well as some of the more classic volume licensing agreements. Looking at the glossary updates this month, so there's a cloud add-on to SA update in there. Microsoft have also added in the Azure Direct model, which means an AI model designated and deployed as as an Azure Direct model in Azure AI Foundry. Also, what we saw was the covered product section was updated in the glossary term. So Microsoft updated the definition to be more specific this month. So you can see instead of saying the Azure OpenAI service, they now say Azure OpenAI model in Azure AI Foundry. So this likely reflects the offering is how the offering, should I say, is going to be organized or branded moving forward into the future. So they were the key updates that I looked at this month. Over to you, William.
Thank you. So under Microsoft Azure, they've collated together the changes. So they've added Azure App Service Plan to the MCA availability table. This is App Service Plan's always been available under MCA, so it's a bit of housekeeping, I think. They've also added microphone section to the specific service terms for Azure Communication Services. So this is interesting because it requires developers to notify their end users when a microphone is being accessed. So it's putting the emphasis on the developers to build in the notification at time of build, rather than, for example, when you start a Teams call, people asking, "Do you want this to be recorded?" So sort of bring it further down the development chain, and the emphasis on the developer, not the Microsoft or the service administrator at the time. They've also updated Microsoft Entra ID external user allowance clause, which basically it's a new clause for Entra ID governance, and it specifies that Entra ID governance for external identities may only be used for external users. So this has been an age-old sort of Azure Active Directory and Entra ID scenario where what is an external user. So this very much sort of brings into that into play the definition of an external user as a non-employed and non-contracting user within someone's environment. And the final piece was, as Carl alluded to, they've added terms to Azure AI Foundry service, which basically brings it all under a sort of central portal within Azure to help with the comprehensive sort of managing, creating, administering of AI solutions within Azure. So that was my updates.
Very good. Over to you, Neve.
Grand. Well, I guess one of the kind of interesting points is where Microsoft have we added Dragon Copilot, which is Copilot for the healthcare industry, to the security and practices and policies and location of customer data at rest clauses for core services, and Dragon Copilot was also added to the EDUB commitments, and EDUB is educational user benefit. So I guess with the security and privacy, it's basically just enhanced security practices for Dragon Copilot, and obviously transparency for data location. And then with the EDUB or educational commitments, that likely mean it'll be available for educational purposes and enhancing learning tools and resources. So then with the Microsoft Power Platform, there was an update there where Microsoft Copilot Studio has been added as a covered product to the customer copyright commitment. And what is that? Just for kind of as a reminder, the customer copyright commitment is where Microsoft will defend any kind of copyright claims in generally as part of any use of Microsoft AI and so on. So they were really the two kind of updates that I looked at. And I guess there, just to note as well, that there were a couple of licensing briefs that got released as part of the month of May, which was after I think we had done our previous recording for the May product terms. So it's interesting. The two that I looked at were the licensing servers for kind of virtual use, which it was kind of good to get that refresher in terms where they talk about the difference between running instances and then kind of saving instances on a server, and what kind of constitutes when a license gets kind of used. Versus it was just a pity to see that the server versions that were being referenced in the document are at least a version ago, N-1. So that was kind of confusing to a degree, just kind of a bit, it would have been nice to see the current versions of SQL, 2022, etc. It's a 2025, I think, isn't it, that we're on?
Yeah.
And likewise for kind of Windows Server, they reference 2022, and we're on 2025, of course, at the moment. Then the other one that I tried to look at is the you're able to download the SharePoint server licensing brief, but you can't open it. It says that I don't have the permission to do it. So I'm going to write a very strongly worded email to Microsoft after we do this recording. So that's pretty much kind of the updates anyway from me.
Very good. Yeah. I also had a quick look at the core-based licensing brief as well, and there's nothing new in there. I suppose it's really just reframing some of the changes that have been made, particularly since October 2022, around licensing individual virtual machines. The brief itself seems to kind of consolidate core licensing across multiple products. So, having a kind of a central view of SQL, BizTalk, Windows Server, and System Center is also present in the documentation. There's some interesting kind of scenarios in there to help people get their head around the dark art of licensing on a core basis. So things like stacking, license mobility, minimum license requirements, which is something that always trips people up. Also some kind of,
was that mentioned, with SQL, hyperthreading is key as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so that was it. So there was nothing, there's no, I suppose, like we would have caught them on the product terms as we do each month. But anything that's in the brief is really, is effectively old news. There's nothing in there that's going to have a material change for organizations. But given the complexities of Microsoft core-based licensing, it's always good to have a refresher and make sure that you're up to date and have a good understanding of how those licensing rules apply. Because I think as we see more customers adopt cloud native capabilities, there's somewhat of a disconnect, I think, for some organizations around how products need to be licensed in the on-premise world, which, as we all know, leads to potential waste and, in many cases, risks of non-compliance as well.
Yeah, I had a quick look at the Windows 11 for virtual desktop licensing guide and did a comparison between the old Windows 10 one, and there's absolutely no change in the rules. You can use essentially Windows to deploy secure centrally managed virtual desktops at scale. But the key thing about that is it doesn't include OEM, so it has to be a volume license or a CSP or sort of Microsoft customer agreement type motion, and definitely not OEM. And that was the only, just to reinforce that point.
The moral of the story is refer to the product terms and your licensing agreement, your commercial licensing agreement, to be sure, really.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like everything all comes back to the product terms. Like over the years, there's been gaps in terms of what's been articulated in a licensing brief with versus what's been in the product terms themselves. So, always refer back to the product terms. So I think that about wraps it up for this month's update. As always, if you have any Microsoft licensing related queries or any other vendor licensing related queries, feel free to reach out to the Software Asset Management practice here at Version 1. We would be delighted to help. Until next month's update, Niamh, William, thanks again for your input. Chat to you then.